Hello, and welcome to another Raw Sport interview. We haven't done one of these in a while, but I think it's our first one for 2021, actually, which is exciting. But yeah, here we go, another one. Obviously, I should introduce myself. Obviously, I am your head of sport, Josh Sim, head of Raw Sport. And yeah, we obviously Raw 12:51 a.m. We've had a week of Women's Week programming. Obviously, and International Women's Day. We are recording this on Tuesday, the day after International Women's Day. And to help sort of commemorate that and to tie into that, we went on a search for an interviewee, and we sort of found one, which is exciting. As you can tell, we got BBC Sports Katie Smith is joining us in just a sec. Before I bring her on, I should obviously mention, if you're watching this for the first time or listening to this for the first time, whether it's on YouTube, Facebook, or our podcast feed, you can follow our social media in whatever description box provided. And yeah, just check out some of the other interviews we've done. We've talked to people, for those who don't know us, we've talked to people like Crystal Palace's Nathan Ferguson, footballer. We've talked to The Guardian's deputy sports editor Ed Aarons, The Athletic's Daniel Taylor. We've brought in a collection of people, an eclectic mix of people who you might find interesting to hear from as well. So you can check that in, the history of, I don't know, the podcast or the YouTube folder, however you do it really. But yeah, I'm really excited to bring Katie on. So let's do that. And here we go. Katie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me. It doesn't feel that long since I've done student radio, but just hearing you introduce it, I miss. I mean, I know you miss the studio anyway at the moment because you can't be there, but I do miss the buzz. I went to Leeds, not Warwick, but I loved the kind of hub of student radio, and it's such an amazing space to meet people, work with, and just obviously it's brought me to the career I work in today. So amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should just quickly, give an introduction about you. You obviously, as you sort of referred to, you were the head of sport at Leeds Uni radio station. And then you write and produce for the Mix Zone. Am I right?
Yes. Yeah. Good research.
Yeah. And no, if you want to introduce what the Mix Zone is.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if we're talking about International Women's Week, the Mix Zone is where I started kind of doing everything, really. It's sadly doesn't really exist anymore, but it was kind of the media arm of the Women's Sports Trust, which is obviously an incredible organisation, started after London 2012 to, really provide a platform for women's sport, and not just a token gesture of here's some results or here's, someone you may have heard of. It's actually bringing these incredible stories of amazing athletes who've actually been around for a really long time and haven't been given the platform they deserve and the kind of recognition they deserve. So I worked with an amazing woman called Sue Mott, who is just an absolute kind of god in the world of not only, newspaper broadcast journalism, but in her role in looking at women's sport. And for me, that's always been, as a woman who loves sport and hasn't always necessarily felt like you're welcome in the circles that you want to be in, i.e. going to football games or covering sports events. It was so important to me and a passion of mine right from the start that women's sport was something I always talked about and always focused on. And from the Mix Zone, from going to Leeds Uni, I kind of wormed my way into the BBC somehow, and it's something that I still do, every single day that I work. We're thinking about, okay, how are we going to bring women's stories to the fore? How are we not going to stop, not going to keep, looking at women's sport as a separate entity now? So things around like the language we use. So I do a lot of bulletins on BBC 5 Live Radio. So we do things like thinking about, okay, well, we're talking about women's football here, but do we need to call them Arsenal women, or can we just call them Arsenal? It's not really our point or our job to be flagging that to people. And you do get a lot of comments going, oh, you just said Arsenal won 5-0, but you meant the women. It's like, well, still Arsenal, isn't it? I haven't said anything wrong. And then another big part of my job, I guess, within that is thinking about where we put women's sports in the order of what we're talking about. So in a bulletin, you might have 5 or 6 stories to cover in 3 minutes. there's this incredible unbeaten run that Chelsea have been on in the Women's Super League. Well,
Yeah.
I'm not just going to put that at the bottom of the bulletin because it's women's sport. That's an incredible achievement. And there's a lot of characters within women's football now in England that we know and want to hear from, i.e. Emma Hayes, their manager. So maybe that goes top of the bulletin. So sorry, that was a very long answer, but
No.
It's something I'm always thinking about. Yeah.
No, I'm curious. I mean, you mentioned, how the bulletins are structured, and obviously, you have your producers and people who compile the research and stuff. But is it yourself who gets sort of the say of where it gets structured? Is it a group of people who get to say, like, how much input do you get into sort of things like that?
Yeah, it's a real team effort. So I produce and present bulletins, which I think is the perfect way to really understand the editorial side of what you're putting in the bulletins. And so generally we work in a team of 2 to 3 people across the day, and it really is a conversation. So it's also, for me as someone, one of my real passion sports is athletics, and I cover that a lot for BBC World Service. So another argument or discussion we sometimes have is, where do we place, maybe more minor sports? Because football is king always. And, if it's a good football story, it will always go top in England because that's what people really, really care about. At the same time, there's so many other sports going on and so many other things that people care about. So it's deciding between the 2 of us or 3 of us where these things rank. And also, I think it's important to say, like early on, there isn't a right or wrong answer. Like, we do work in sport. It's a subjective medium. To me, someone winning gold in the European athletics, which has just happened this weekend in Poland, like, that's a really exciting story and I want to talk about it. I'm pretty sure my colleague to the left of me doesn't care, particularly because Rangers have just won the Scottish Premiership title. That's obviously going to be our lead story. But if you can justify your reasons around it, I don't think there ever is a right or wrong answer. The only thing I would say is that within that, you are always looking consciously at your choices, particularly when it comes to gender, particularly when it comes to sort of stories of diversity or underrepresentation. We've been covering, sadly, so racism in football is, a huge news talking point that we've had to look at over the last 18 months. And that is something that you really have to think, okay, where is this story's place in our running order? And how do we decide how we're going to also approach that with really sensitive language? And I think it's always a conversation. I'd always say, you'd never want to just make these decisions alone. Like, always talk to the people around you. And it's a really good, strong environment, particularly at the BBC. We make such a big effort to be, because we're funded by public licensed fee payers' money, we've got to be representative and we've got to think about everyone's views. So it's really important.
Yeah, and you sort of, you mentioned, and I don't really, I cringe when I use the term, but the smaller sports, or the less popular sports. Obviously, you guys are a journalist organization who sort of need, and you mentioned sort of, there was a lot of attention obviously on Rangers this past weekend, winning the football, the title in Scotland. Is it down to, do you sort of pitch to the BBC, your editor or so, about what story you want to cover? Is it something that kind of just comes up on your desk and then you're offered the chance to report on it? I don't know if you just covered that in your answer just before, but how does that work in some way? Because it's interesting to see, and it's interesting to see now, I guess, having for the last few years looked at the BBC Sports coverage, you are seeing sort of an effort to sort of cover, again, I cringe, but niche stories than you would normally see in, mainstream press.
I think the way to potentially try and see it in the simplest form is thinking about, obviously there's so many aspects to BBC Sport. So I work within the sports news radio department, is kind of my area. So if you think about it, I'm working in essentially a newsroom, so 24-hour news. So we have constant handovers coming to us between each shift. So say I'm on in the daytime, someone covers the evening, someone's on in the morning. We're constantly handing over information to one another about what's been happening, what audio we've played, what stories we've covered, what we still need to cover. And within that, I guess we are very much led by the news agenda. So, just as the guys who do the 10 o'clock news on BBC TV, we are going to be dictated to by what the stories are. I think then you've got to look at separate departments within the BBC or BBC Sport, which are more of the feature angles. So as you say, I don't think it's bad to say niche sport. I say niche sport all the time. I think that's fine. Maybe, I think sometimes if you called rugby a niche sport, I think we might have issues. But I can appreciate there are some niche sports that we cover. And I've recently done a feature on triathlon, and this big sort of I use the term loosely, world record attempt coming up. It won't be an official world record, but it's this really exciting thing in the sport, and they're trying to get a lot of attention about it. That was something I saw and thought, oh, well, this is a sport I absolutely love. I think this is so interesting. And I pitched it, and someone said, yeah, that sounds great. If you could get the interview sorted, we'll give you time to write it up. And I did that, and I made a radio version as well to go with it. So yeah, I guess the simplest way to think about it is you've got the sports news agenda, which is, as you say, we covered Rangers this weekend. We had to, huge story. Even if I'm not saying anything against Rangers, it's fantastic. Even if I wasn't that bothered by football, we would always still cover it. I would never kind of pitch a story for the news, because the news is just the news. I think then you have this separate angle, which is the kind of feature aspect, or looking at smaller sports. Or, for example, if the European athletics, I keep mentioning that, I was working on that this weekend, has just happened, and there's this really cool athlete that we've never really spoken to, you'd then say, okay, maybe we should look to be doing something with them and kind of creating a bit of news from that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. And I asked also because, I mean, we have, as you probably guessed, we probably have a lot of students watching, and just, demystifying sort of what goes on is obviously really important. And
I would say,
go on.
I was just going to say, but having obviously personally gone from student radio, I think one thing I would say that you always get stressed at people stress this when you're at student radio, and I still think nobody really listens to it, is really trying to understand the role of a producer. Because I think, you go to student radio and everyone wants to make really cool radio and play amazing songs and do their mixes and talk about sport, and that's fantastic, and it's obviously, that's the core of everything you do. But I would say I came to the BBC still not totally convinced of what does a producer actually do. I remember people telling us at Leeds, and they'd be like, oh, they plan the content, and I'm like, what does that actually mean? So I would say, and it's far more likely when you start out in sports journalism, that you need to absolutely nail that before they're going to let you go anywhere near the microphone or covering your own stories. You need to understand that, particularly in radio, what a producer does. And I don't know if you want me to tell you. We just see that.
We can. I mean, yeah. I am actually very interested in hearing that.
Is that something you would agree with? Do you think people talk about production enough?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this, obviously, when students sort of come into, knowing what student radio is for the first time, I think it's obviously presenting as sort of the thing that, captures people instantly. And then you get into production, and then it is sort of, and it does sort of feel like those who are obviously passionate about their own shows and the show will sort of take it upon themselves to take the initiative with production and stabs and graphics and all that kind of stuff. And there is I do sort of see, I mean, it is, the casual person who kind of comes in for their show once a week or so, maybe it's for them, maybe it's not so much of something that they'll key in on, but I don't know if you agree with that, but that's sort of the thing. That's sort of the thing I sort of observe at the moment.
No, it's just interesting that I guess even there, your sort of definition of production is all the sounds we hear and the excitement around it. And really, to me, production is far more about the content of what you're creating. And I suppose in a way, if you're doing your solo show on student radio, you are your own producer. I think a lot of people don't realize that, and the kind of creative control that producers can have. It's a really exciting thing. So I would it's a really hard question now that I brought it up. I would define production as the person who is in creative control of what the show is. So if you imagine you're doing an hours radio show, they're the person who is going to have the timings down to a T. They're the person who knows, right, we're going to hit this interview at this time. I want you to do 4 minutes with this person. By the time you finish that, I've got this person lined up for you. We're going to hear 4 minutes of audio from Jurgen Klopp, and then we're going to bring in this expert who's going to talk about German football and all of that. And I think people can sometimes think, oh, that's the boring side. I just want to bring the show to life. But actually, they have all the kind of ideas and creativity and discipline. And I think that to me is so, so important when you start out in radio, is the understanding that it's not just about the shiny person in front of the microphone. It's about, and like we already said, you know, if you're just looking at a bulletin, for example, we do 3-minute sports bulletins every hour on BBC 5 Live. Thinking about, okay, how much can we get in 3 minutes? Or do we need to cut a story because really this story needs a lot more explaining? Or what voice are we going to get? Can we get, you know, our football correspondent, John Murray, to join us and talk us through, oh God, there's breaking news. Like, how are we going to do this? So we need to speak to the show. So I think that aspect is super important.
Yeah, and I will, if you let me, I'll shamelessly plug, we've got our society elections coming up. And for those who want to take on, I mean, obviously people who feel and probably would do a better job than I am, you do sort of pick up those skills, like in terms of, you know, deciding what topics go on the show, social media, like clipping out what bit should we clip out and what would make a good, you know, clip on Instagram, on Twitter, whatever it is. I am sort of like, you know, understanding the complexities more of it as I do a lot more of it as well. So you sort of, I mean, in student radio, you sort of grow into it. You sort of like pick it up along the way, yeah, it's a lot of fun, I guess, discovering it as you go along. I did want to. You mentioned sort of some of the interviews and content. And by the way, if you follow Katie's Twitter, which will come around on the banner at some point, you can find all the sort of articles that you've done for BBC Sport and sort of the audio ones as well. And there were some particular ones I wanted to bring up that you've done recently. I mean, in the case of Taylor Townsend, who, for those who don't know, is an American tennis player, who spoke to you about her experiences about racism and being a mother in sport. Was that something that you pitched? Was that something that the BBC came to, or whoever the editor sort of came to you and said, we've got Taylor Townsend, do you want to talk to her? How did that one come about, for instance?
So with that one, so I do a lot of work with BBC World Service, which is the kind of global arm of BBC Radio, which for people who, World Service is a really interesting platform because we have millions of listeners around the world. Particularly our biggest audience for sport, for example, is in East Africa. So we have millions of people who tune into the Premier League football commentaries we do every week. And I think in the UK, people don't know that much about World Service, but it's an incredible platform. And I just always want to plug it because I just think the coverage is incredible, particularly if you just sometimes find that, national radio here is so domestic focused. World Service gives you this whole different perspective. So I present a show on there called Sport Today, which is a few of us present kind of, it's half an hour every day, just looking at the main sports news stories. So in February, it was Black History Month in America and Canada. And so, for example, this is where World Service, I think, is this incredible platform because we obviously cover Black History Month here in the UK, but last month it was only in North America. So domestic services aren't, too overly bothered about looking at it. Well, I mean, we look at it all the time. Obviously, we're kind of looking at diversity and celebrating that. At the same time, it was a really good opportunity to get really stuck into it for the month of February on World Service and really make a point of showcasing some different voices and different athletes from around the world. So the producer working on the show came to me and said, we've got this interview lined up. She set it up with Taylor Townsend, who is, initially we were looking at it as this really interesting story about a really brilliant pro tennis player who is pregnant. So she's not going to play for the rest of this year. I think she was going to give birth this month, actually. But in line with Black History Month as well, we were saying, well, we know she's spoken before about body shaming that she's received when she was younger for people assuming that she was, competing in age categories that were younger than the age she was because she was more developed and being kind of, there was a really horrible incident. I think it was, I might be wrong here. I think it was 2012. She was the number one ranked junior tennis player in America. And she was not allowed to compete at the US Open, which is obviously one of the 4 tennis Grand Slams in the year. So a huge deal. She wasn't allowed to compete because they said she was, her fitness wasn't good enough. And, she's the number one tennis player junior ranked in the US, so obviously her fitness must be fairly good. Really, it was more a comment on the fact that she was her build was a lot bigger than some of the other athletes she was competing against. So it really sparked this conversation about, wow, you've just told this 18-year-old that she's at the top of her game, and yet she's not fit enough. And we know there have been similar kind of comments thrown at Serena Williams in the past, who's obviously one of the greatest of all time. So we set up this interview, and kind of like we're doing here, often we do it at the moment because we're just so confined with the situation with the pandemic. We do a lot of it on Zoom, which in a way has been really amazing because everyone is so much more accessible now, and they have so much more time, as do we. So we can really pitch for like amazing people to speak to that we didn't get to before. So someone like her, it's so easy as well because we can kind of conveniently say, okay, well, when's a good time for you? We don't need to get you into a studio in America or anything like that. And we just have this amazing conversation. And something else I think is probably quite prevalent to people in student radio at the moment is, I think sometimes interviewing someone that's a similar age to you can be a really powerful experience, because we can't lie. A lot of the people in broadcasting are a lot older than we are because they've been there for a really long time. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. They're so experienced. They have so much more of everything than I could possibly imagine. At the same time, as a 25-year-old, I come in sometimes and I get to interview these young women. And I really feel like an important interview technique for me is always finding your similarities and being able to empathize and share. So I think she was 25, 26. She's having her first child. So that's an aspect I can't relate to. At the same time, I feel like in a way we can sort of share a language or a kind of relaxed nature that I think sometimes young people feel more together than they do when they are speaking to people of a kind of different generation. Saying that, obviously the interview was about some really troubling situations she's had as a young Black woman in America. Obviously something I cannot relate to and will never be able to fully understand as a young white woman living in the UK. So I think it's that. So going back to your original point, the reason I think that was so powerful as an interview was because I was drawing on some of my experiences and being able to bring out kind of this really relaxed, candid version of her. At the same time, it's always sitting back and listening. I always say with an interview, I personally never want to write too many questions down. I'll have notes about what I want to ultimately get onto if there's a particular point we want to get onto. But I think so many people forget to actually listen to what they are saying to you. And I think that is where you can get your absolute best stuff, because if you're just thinking about the next question you're going to ask, you're going to miss that amazing point that they just made, or that really powerful thing that you can pick up on and go, oh my God, wow, I totally get that. And I just think that creates the best kind of radio. Sorry, I feel like I've gone off on such a tangent. That was the question, wasn't it? About how that came about.
It was a lead into that, and that was fascinating listening for me. But it is an important. She's not an athlete that many people in the UK will know of, for example, and yet her story is so fascinating and so enlightening. I know you're going to agree with this, but it does feel really important to have that story out there, and obviously grateful for you to getting her to tell that story. But it does feel like especially now, it does feel like in this kind of era, it does feel really important to have that story told in sports media.
Yeah, I think even in our generation now, we're still even so much more significantly aware of these issues and kind of in tune with them, that I think we don't realize like maybe how new this still all is. I think in the media before we talked about racism, but we really didn't try and talk about racism and try and understand it and give these people platforms to say it and not come back with arguments, because it's racism. As a white person, I can't relate to that experience. And it's so important that we give these platforms to listen. So it wasn't just her we spoke to across the entire month. We spoke to some brilliant athletes. I spoke to Pamphilette Buissa, who is a Canadian rugby player who was supposed to be competing at the Olympics, obviously, when it was originally going on last year. That got cancelled. She was at a complete loss. You know, you trained for this for like 4 or 5 years. Suddenly it's not happening. What do you do? And then the death of George Floyd happened in America in the summer, and she began starting rallies in her hometown in Canada and has become this really important person within that movement and sharing her story, and also now making changes within the sport of rugby in Canada, because it's not a particularly representative sport. And she, for a while, was kind of the only Black woman on her team. And now she's created these safe spaces in which people can come in. And I think sometimes we can get bogged down with thinking, oh, yeah, well, you know, I've heard of people who've moved into activism because they want to tackle racism. But actually, if you get into those stories and you actually hear what it's like, and hear her talking about her parents had emigrated to Canada from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And she tells stories about how, you know, she was basically always trying to change her hair because she didn't fit in. And people would like speak slower to her in a room because they decided that she wouldn't understand what they were saying. And, you know, these things are just absolutely mind boggling. And I think as a generation, I would like to think that we really are becoming understanding. But in the media as a whole, where we look at absolutely everything, there's still so far to go, as you say. So, yeah, I totally agree. These stories are so, so important to say.
Yeah, and to pick up on a point you just mentioned, you mentioned how you said you might feel nervous if you mess up in a, you know, I don't know, a detail missing or something along those lines, because people will pick you out for your gender. Obviously, you're at more at the start of your sports journalism career than some people who have obviously still get sort of the same negative attention and obviously a bit more experienced. Does that worry you? I mean, when you were sort of getting into thinking of what to do post uni and thinking the sports journalism career is what I want, did that like sort of discourage you? Was that a concern, or were you determined, I guess, that I want to be part of it and I want to change the narrative, I guess, because it's about time that the narrative gets changed?
Yeah, honestly, I've always been one of those people, like, if someone says something's impossible, I like to prove you wrong. And I think that sort of plays into it. At the same time, I mean, I'm also someone who feels like no opportunity should be barred to anyone, regardless of, you know, anything that might be different about them. So I guess I came into it, one, thinking, well, there's absolutely no reason I shouldn't be doing this, because if I want to do it, I will do it. And two, what's the first point I made? Yeah, wanting to prove people wrong, because it's just something I really enjoy. I mean, is there anything more satisfying in the world when someone tells you can't do something and then you absolutely smash it? I mean, it's the best feeling ever. And, you know, it kind of started at student radio, where there'd never, ever been a female head of sport at Leeds student radio. So I kind of said to myself, well, one, there's no reason why that shouldn't be. Sorry, I'm out the camera. I'll put it there. And two, I'm going to do it. I'm like, I'll prove you wrong. Like, there's no reason why. And I did it. And I think it's so powerful sometimes, realizing the power that you have, as you say, to change the narrative. Like, once you're in the organization, or once you're in the room, the meeting where they're talking about it, you can bring your opinion, you can bring your expertise. Something else I always say is, like, there's nothing, we always say football is king, and it will always be the kind of sport that is most talked about. I love football. I always have, always will, but I'm not fanatic about football. For me, my sport is athletics. I absolutely love track and field. And to me, the Olympic Games is the absolute pinnacle of everything. I just think it's incredible. And I think there's nothing wrong with being able to bring expertise from another sport. Just because football, I would never lie to you. You need to know your football if you want to get into sports journalism, or, you know, not work in a particular one sports kind of organization. You absolutely need to know it. You need to embrace it. You need to be prepared to watch hours on end, because right now there is literally nothing else to do. But if you love another sport, there will come a time when that is really, really important. And as we were already talking about, you know, you can be pitching ideas in that field. I have a really good friend of mine who works at the BBC who absolutely loves gymnastics, and she knows everything about it. She follows it to a T. And she has been instrumental in bits of gymnastics news that we cover over the years, and she's now been part of this huge story about welfare in the sport of gymnastics, all because she was the one who kept saying, we need to cover this, we need to cover this, this is a massive story. So you just need to be in the room and you can change things. And I, personally, I think being a woman, we can't forget we are women, but I love to try and make that as little difference as possible, unless we're bringing it as a good thing. The experience we bring, the slightly different perspective, like, right here on International Women's Week, when, so I'm just going to say it, some men really don't like talking about periods. It makes them really, really uncomfortable. And it's just, to me, half the population have them. They're such an essential part of talking about women's sport, because literally every month a female athlete is having to not only tackle the high intensity training, the diet, the, keeping away from everyone else, keeping themselves safe, thinking about the Olympics, grappling with mind games. They're also dealing with a period. It's really, really hard, and we need to be talking about these things. And I think for so long it's kind of been ignored, because if it's guys working in the sports room, they're not going to want to talk about periods. But you bring these women in and we'll talk about it all day long. So I think it's so important that we're there and we bring this other perspective, but at the same time, we're normalizing the fact that women are here and we can absolutely do everything that men can do. Anyway, I'll pipe down now.
No, I am now envisioning sort of a t-shirt of your quote saying some men don't want to talk about periods and making like a movement or something like that. I also did want to mention, and I don't think we discussed beforehand, but I'm lucky that obviously it was part of the Warwick student radio station, also on AM. Both our station managers are female and our program controller is female. So the three most powerful roles in the exec are female, which is it's really exciting, and we've very sort of we've sort of moved forward, I guess, for the better, and there's been changes made, and it's super exciting. And anyway, that's a minute detail, but I did feel like it was cool to bring that one up. To talk about, I know we don't have a whole lot much time with you left, so I'll move on to some sort of light-hearted-ish questions, or steering it into some silly ones that I've got. We talked about student radio. What's the most memorable thing do you remember doing on student radio? Whether it was silly, whether it was just like, oh my gosh, this is happening. What do you have any that comes to mind?
Yeah, I have two. I have three. Please indulge me. Number one was the best thing I ever did was when I'd just taken over as head of sport, and every year, I assume you have varsity at Warwick, do you? Like what varsity day?
Yeah, not this year, but yes, normally, yeah.
So obviously in Leeds, it's Leeds Uni against Leeds Beckett. So it's, hot rivalry, every sport gets involved. And the showpiece event is at Headingley Stadium, where the two rugby teams play one another. And everyone goes, like tickets are really hard to get. And Leeds Student Radio always cover it as an event. So we went along, and you're kind of part of the whole like media leading up to it, where you go and watch the training and do filming with them and take interviews with all the players and the captains. And then you get to the event itself, and I sort of presented our coverage, and then we had one of the guys on my team was doing commentary, and we did co-commentator. And it was the first time that I was like, oh my God, I'm Gabby Logan. Like, this is incredible. Can we go? And, it's the buzz of live sport. It's everything I love. And that was just incredible. And it was such a team effort, like all the engineers putting all the kit together. The station manager was there. We had like halftime kind of show with songs and stuff. It was that was amazing. When it just, everything comes together and you're like, God, we're not just student radio. Like we're actually, people genuinely tune in for that as well if they can't get a ticket. So because no one else is covering it. So yeah, that was incredible. And that was really when I was like, oh my God, sports broadcasting is totally for me. Like being paid to come and like watch people play sport. Is there anything better in life? And then we did a overnight show for, I'm trying to think which election it would have been. Was it the American one? When did Trump come in? That was 2016. No, it would have been before that. So it must have been a general election. I think it's when, was there a general election 2015? Does that ring a bell?
I feel like 2015. Yeah, 2015 there was one. Yeah.
So we did like an overnight coverage of that, and I had the slot at about 2 a.m. and we'd each been given this 2-hour slot, like one presenter, one producer, and we like had to come up with, you know, fun features, and that was just bonkers, but so much fun. And it was one of those where I just made so many friends, because you're up at 2 a.m, you kind of like, why are we doing this? But we actually created really good radio, so it kind of made it worth it. Oh, what was my third one going to be? Oh, so I used to do this really stupid show with a friend of mine on a Friday morning that was, I don't think we ever quite worked out what it was. It was just a self-indulgent kind of, you know, let's hear ourselves on the radio. But we used to do this feature where, because I loved commentary and sports and she was really active, she would go out into the courtyards, which was just outside the studio. It's hard to describe. It was kind of a big courtyard area, and our studio window looks out onto it. So she would go out there and do stupid things with everyone around watching, and I would do commentary on the radio of what was going on, and we'd live film it at the same time. And you know, at the time you just think, oh my god, we're so revolutionary, like no one's ever thought of doing something this funny, we're so amazing. And I think we had about 2 views in total, and it was rubbish but amazing.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean that's the beauty of student radio, is that you can just do whatever you want, and most of the time get away with it if you're playing to Ofcom's rules.
Oh, and I would say just absolutely milk it for all it's worth, and you know, make all the mistakes you want to make, and just be super creative. I think I would at times get a bit lazy and think, oh god, it's another radio show, I'll just play music. And actually it's such an amazing platform to just explore and speak to people. And I guess as with sport as well, you know, we do kind of like a proper soccer Saturday type feel, and try and make it sound really professional, because also, like, never forget, if you do something really great and you save it, you'll always have that for demos. And you know, I think a demo will never stay the same for that long. Like I wouldn't be using my student radio demo now to kind of do stuff, but there's always that one thing that you think, oh god, I did that so well, and you can never find it again. And it's always worth having it, because I think if it's really good, it's not going to age hugely much. So yeah, I would say just kind of do think about it as it's so much fun, and it's just the best thing I did when I was at uni. But there is always like a professional side to it if you wanted it to be there, and there's stuff you can really take from it. And you know, people are impressed when you say, I dedicated this amount of time. And you know, I was on the committee, head of sport, then I was head of daytime for a year. Like it's a cool thing to be a part of.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I totally recommend it as well, as I come to the end of my uni time. 2 questions. I've got 2 questions. So the first one is, obviously, you mentioned your passion for athletics. Is there an individual who maybe we don't know too much about that you're excited to watch out for, maybe at the Olympics, assuming it goes on, obviously? I'm sort of putting you on the spot there, but is there a name that comes to mind?
Yeah, I suppose she is a little bit more in the spotlight now after this past weekend. She's called Keely Hodgkinson. She's 19 years old. She's an 800-meter runner for GB, and she's trained by Jenny Meadows, who a lot of you will probably remember as a former GB athlete herself, who I actually work with quite a lot on World Service. And she is, I'm partly saying this because I think Jenny is just fantastic, but they have kind of trained. So Keely Hodgkinson, she's only 19, and they've been training her up, and she just races like she's so much older, and she is amazing. And I think she was the kind of person where you would have said, okay, this year, let's focus on junior, like under 20 events. And now she's just won a European gold, granted in an event where a few of the favorites like Laura Muir weren't there. At the same time, I think once you've won a senior medal at a major event, there's nothing stopping you completely taking that confidence and taking it elsewhere. And I think what's so exciting about her is that I don't think she'll necessarily win Olympic gold, but I think she's got the tools now to definitely be in with the shot of a medal. But she's also got people like Laura Muir and Gemma Reekie around her to like build off. This is incredible, like start of a great British dynasty in, you know, middle distance running. And I think that's so exciting. And to be 19 years old and to be able to just come into your first senior championships and run like that is phenomenal. So yeah, definitely one to watch.
That's amazing. And finally, without jinxing them, and I'm on a wooden desk, so I'm just going to knock on wood. Are we gonna see the bees in the top flight next year? Is that gonna happen? Should we will it into existence?
I want to will it into existence, whether it's going to happen. So our last game got cancelled because Rotherham had COVID cases, which I think is personally a good thing for the team because we are looking a bit tired. Oh, I can't believe you've asked me this. I don't know. It's too hard. We got so close last year. To be honest, the way we're playing this season, I'm so pleased with what the club is about and what we're built on. I'm giving you such a rubbish answer here, aren't I? I think in my heart of hearts, I think we're just going to miss out on automatic promotion, and I think we'll get into the playoffs again. Is what I'm saying. Who do you support? What's your team?
Well, it's Liverpool, so the less said, the better.
Your losing runs even worse than ours.
But that, yeah. So the less said about that one, the better. But where I went to school in London was near Brentford. It was in that Richmond area, so I've always had a sort of soft spot for Brentford. Yeah. So fingers crossed they can.
I'm more gutted about the fact that I missed their last game at Griffin Park because obviously there were no crowds allowed back then. And we've now played almost an entire season in the new stadium, and I still haven't been able to go, which is kind of crazy. No, I think Brentford's. I won't go on too long, but I think Brentford's a brilliant club for a lot of other kind of football teams to model themselves on in terms of like the way we recruit, the way everything is managed, the way that we lose Watkins last season, we lose Ben Rama, and then we bring in Ivan Toney, who scores like 25 plus goals, and you're just like, where do these teams come from? And we recruit these completely obscure Scandinavian teenagers, and you just think they'll do no good, and then they're just suddenly absolutely stellar, and the Premier League comes knocking. So I think also as a Brentford fan, there is a slight kind of tendency to not get too attached to things, because we always know the way our system is structured is that if we create these amazing players, we sell them off for profit because we always have someone new coming in. So you're pleased for them to see Ollie Watkins smashing it at Villa, but you're not going to be devastated because there's a plan for someone else to come through. And therefore, I don't know, to me, that slightly translates into, I would absolutely love us to get into the Premier League, and the excitement of a promotion race is just unbelievable. It's the only thing I'm living for right now. But I'm not going to get too carried away because there are teams that are far better kind of supply. I just looking at Norwich and Watford, and it's looking a bit ominous for me now. So, Norwich are way and clear. I think Watford are going to potentially snatch the other place. Anyway, I rest myself there. I'm not going to give you a proper answer.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have to come back to you in like another interview or something and see afterwards, and then just do like I'm trying to think of another word other than post-mortem, but that's the only one that's coming to mind. Post-celebration. Post-celebration? Does that work? Yeah, that works. Katie, I know we're going to end it there because I know you need to go. So thank you so much for coming on and just talk. I mean, we were just talking for 50 minutes about. Yeah. It was great. I loved it so much. Thank you.
Oh, great. No, I'm thank you so much for having me. I have a habit of just talking. We all love the sound of our own voices in radio, don't we? So just talk away. But no, thank you for having me.
No, it's great. And so guys, make sure you follow her. Again, I'm waiting for that banner to come around, but you make sure you follow her on Twitter. And if you haven't seen what we do, make sure you follow us as well. And we will be back, I guess, on Saturday. We'll probably do something on Saturday, another football show probably. So we will see you then. And thank you for watching or listening. And enjoy the rest of your week.